used to live in Midway, Utah, a quiet farming town that's totally changed in the last 7 years or so. Now it's all cabins and vacation homes, since it's only about 5 miles from Park City. The town was officially founded in 1891, but people had been living there since around 1850. Back in the day, it was actually pretty busy with mining, just like Park City. There was this one major mine up Snake Creek Canyon that hardly anyone remembers now. My grandpa used to talk about it sometimes. It's wild how quickly a place can transform. What used to be farmland and old mining country is now mostly second homes and tourists passing through on their way to the slopes. You can only find proof it even existed by digging through the old archives at Town Hall. Maybe because it never had an official name, I spent hours down there going through dusty boxes, and all I could find were 2 documents about the mine, and this short, kind of rushed newspaper clipping from the Salt Lake Tribune about a mining disaster that killed 17 people. Though honestly, I think that number's way off. Based on other records from that era and the mine's size, I'd estimate it was closer to 20 to 30 deaths. What's really strange is how they mined this area. They didn't dig tunnels like everyone else. Instead, they stripped away layer after layer of dirt and rock from the top down. Super unusual for that time period. The small settlement sat right at the bottom of this massive, scraped-away pit while they searched for ore on the surface. And here's the thing. Anyone with half a brain could see the problem. You clear out all the vegetation, leave nothing but loose dirt and rock above an exposed pit, and you're basically asking for disaster. We get insane snowmelts every spring up there that turn the soil into soup. So yeah, a mudslide did happen and buried everyone at the bottom camp, the whole shanty town. Most people around town agree that's where Claire comes from. She was supposedly a young girl, maybe mid to late teens, based on how she appears, who got caught up in the disaster. The story goes she's been trapped in Snake Creek Canyon ever since, unable to move on to the spirit world, or whatever comes next. But every so often, especially when lightning storms roll through, people catch glimpses of her. And she's not like those vague shadow figures or random orbs of light you always hear about in ghost stories. Claire's a full-body apparition who glows like someone's shining a flashlight directly on her, even in pitch darkness. I still can't find the right words for what I saw that night, but picture this. A teenage girl, maybe 5 feet 2 inches to 5 feet 6 inches, wearing pioneer clothes. Her face was pale but clear, not blurry or transparent like in movies. She just stood there by the creek bed, completely still, radiating this cold white light. The hair on my arm stood straight up, and it lasted maybe 10 seconds before she just faded. So a long dress down to her knees with a white apron over the front. Just Google pioneer clothes, and you'll get the idea. She has this blonde brown hair that falls just past her shoulders, and what everyone describes as an almost unnaturally perfect face. But honestly, that's not what makes her so unsettling. It's the aura around her. You know, that shimmer of superheated air you see around a lightning strike. That thin blue haze where everything gets wavy. She has that, but it pulses. And you can feel it too. This raw electric intensity in the air, like right before lightning hits, and every hair on your body stands up. My buddy Jake saw her once and said he could taste metal in his mouth for hours afterward. But the most stunning thing, and this is true for a lot of paranormal stuff, is the eyes. They have this brilliant brightness, with shades of blue constantly shifting inside them, like looking into deep water. That's what freaks people out the most. Drivers catch glimpses of those eyes on stormy nights, off in the trees along the canyon road. They're not even looking for her, but the eyes just stand out. Way more vivid than any animal's eye shine. My coworker, Sarah, nearly drove off the road last April when she saw them staring back at her through the rain. She said they didn't blink, didn't move, just watched her pass by with this sad, knowing look. But the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of my life was when I was at my family's cabin and ended up standing maybe 30 feet away from her. I was looking down from our second floor balcony when I saw her below. This happened late evening on May 24th, 2019. I remember the exact date because I couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks. It was right when the snow was melting, that weird in-between time when hardly anyone's up there. Most people don't bother with their cabins in winter since the road doesn't get plowed until spring. So it was just me, my dad, and complete silence except for the creek rushing with runoff. Then I saw her standing by the tree line, glowing in the twilight. I'd just caught a glimpse of something moving in the trees while I was inside looking out the window. Figured it was a deer, or maybe a moose. So I stepped outside to get a better look. But as soon as I got out there, whatever it was had completely vanished. I was about to head back in when I got this overwhelming, almost suffocating feeling that something was watching me from the tree line. I slowly turned around, and I swear on everything, she just materialized there, like she was fading into existence. First just an outline, then more solid until she was fully there. And just as quick as she showed up, she started disappearing. Her body faded first, leaving just those intense eyes staring at me until the very end. Then those vanished too. I probably stood there frozen for another 30 seconds, just trying to process what I'd seen. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks, or my brain making things up. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. I finally went back inside but couldn't sleep that night. I just kept seeing those blue eyes every time I closed mine. The next day I told my whole family what happened, and they all thought I was losing it, except my grandpa. He said he'd seen her eyes too, years ago. To this day I'm still scared about going back to the cabin, but there's also this weird part of me that's excited about it. This took place about 4 years ago, right at the beginning of the biggest snowstorm of my life. It was February, and in my home state of Massachusetts, we're no strangers to snow. There was already a good foot of snow on the ground from previous storms that had been piling up all month. Right before the storm started, I figured I should dig out some of the snow that had collected in the chicken run. The forecast was calling for another 2 feet, maybe more, and I didn't want the birds getting trapped. I grabbed my shovel around noon, thinking I had plenty of time, but turns out I was wrong about that. It was early morning, and as I was getting ready to go out, I noticed the motion sensor light had flickered on next to the chicken coop. I looked around the yard from my window, but didn't see anything moving. But as I went to the door, my cat Alfred suddenly got in front of it and just stared at me. He was strictly indoor, so it wasn't like he wanted to go outside. I gently nudged him aside with my foot, but he immediately got right back in front of the door. Then he did it again, and again. He kept blocking me, which was weird because he'd never done that before. He even meowed a couple times, looking up at me with those big eyes. I figured he was just being annoying, but there was something different about it. Then I figured maybe he just wanted attention, so I picked him up and set him on a chair in the living room. Then I headed outside onto my back deck. Now my yard is narrow, maybe 30 feet wide by 200 feet long. Just a strip of grass and garden beds that had been slowly getting swallowed up by the forest behind my house. I hadn't really kept up with the edges like I should have. At the far end of my yard, there was this steep hill covered in trees that led up into the rest of the forest. The chicken coop sat about halfway down the yard on the right side, and I could see my breath hanging in the cold air as I stood there looking around. The chicken run was about 10 feet from the deck, so I walked over and got to work. I let them out for a bit, tossed them some feed, then started shoveling the packed snow. When I was about halfway done, one of my chickens, a Rhode Island Red I'd named Red, started squawking like crazy. I've heard these chickens squawk plenty of times before. My two buff Orpingtons always made noise before laying an egg. But this was different. I hadn't heard that kind of sound since my dad's dog got loose and tried to go after them a year back. Red was pacing near the fence, head jerking around, and the other birds started getting worked up too. I was outside the run, dumping a bucket of snow onto a pile by the fence. I looked up at the chickens. They were all pressed against the back of the run, staring at something up on the hill. I followed their gaze to the top of the hill, and what I saw still gives me chills to this day. There was this big black dog-like thing sitting at the top, just staring down at me. I completely froze, staring right back at it. This thing was massive, easily the size of a large dog, maybe bigger. It wasn't moving, just sitting there in the snow between the trees, watching. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Its yellow eyes were glowing in the early morning light, reflecting like a cat's. Then, without warning, it stood up onto its hind legs, like a person would, and turned and bolted into the forest. I didn't even think. I just ran back to my house as fast as I could, nearly slipping on the icy deck. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my hands shaking. Alfred was still sitting on that chair, calm as ever, like he knew. I still don't know what that thing was. Could have been a bear, maybe, but it didn't move like one. I'm reminded of it whenever the motion sensor light goes off at night, or my neighbor's dogs start barking at nothing. This is one of my favorite personal stories, since everything turned out all right, but I still get chills thinking about how many different ways the night could have gone wrong. A few years ago, my friend Jane and I took a trip to Portland, Oregon. We're both from the south side of Chicago, and Jane was feeling pretty jaded with the city. She was convinced everything was better on the West Coast, including the people. So we flew out to Portland on a Friday morning and rented a beat-up Honda Civic, which we named Veronica after Jane's grandmother. The car had this weird rattle whenever we hit 30 miles per hour, but we didn't care. We had a loose itinerary, mostly coffee shops and hiking trails. The day before, we were supposed to fly back home. We took Veronica and drove up to Aberdeen, Washington, to see Kurt Cobain's childhood home. Jane had been obsessed with Nirvana in high school, so this was kind of a pilgrimage for her. After that, we drove down the coast, sightseeing along the way. We visited Astoria, Oregon, to see the house from the Goonies, and ended the day at Cannon Beach to check out Haystack Rock. The beach was freezing and nearly empty, but gorgeous. All in all, it was a pretty nice day. Once it started to get dark around 7 p.m., we decided to head back to our hotel, which is just under 2 hours away. I knew that I needed gas, so I told Jane I would stop at the first gas station I see. Cannon Beach is a small resort-type town. A lot of little shops and restaurants, but I didn't see any gas stations. Being from the city, I'm used to seeing two on every corner. So I wasn't really worried and expected to find one soon. I am completely unfamiliar with the area, so I just keep following the GPS's instructions while talking to Jane about whether we should grab Thai food when we got back. Next thing I know, we're not in any type of town. We're on this narrow, winding road surrounded by trees on both sides. And at this point, I'm getting a little worried. The gas light had just come on. I pull over to the side of the road to use the GPS to search for the nearest gas station, It tells me there's one about a mile down the road. Awesome. So I'm driving, and Veronica tells us that we arrived at our destination. I pull into a completely dark and empty gas station, like abandoned dark. Jane and I just look at each other, and I try the pump anyway. But of course it's dead. According to Veronica, we have about 10 miles worth of gas, and the nearest gas station is 30 miles away. Jane and I are sitting there, trying to figure out what to do when another car pulls in. An old pickup truck. I keep going about my business and don't really pay attention to the other car. I just assume they need gas too. But then Jane grabs my arm. The driver's just sitting there with his headlights on, engine running, not getting out. My heart starts pounding as we're two women alone in the middle of nowhere. Out of the corner of my eye, I see someone gesturing to me. After some hesitation, I crack the window to see what they want. There's a middle-aged man and his wife in the car. He starts asking us all kinds of questions, but I keep my answers polite but short, trying to read the situation. Then he tells us that he actually owns the gas station we're at, but doesn't make enough money to keep it open that late. He says he saw our headlights pull in from his house up the road and came down to check on us. He tells us that he knows of a chevron about 3 miles away and gives us directions for it. He gave us his number and says to give him a call in case we don't make it to the chevron. My name is Sam, the mechanic man. Let me know if you don't make it, and I'll come rescue you ladies. We thank him profusely and head out. Jane is going on and on about how nice that was and how that never would have happened in Chicago. I agreed. That was very nice, but something felt off to me. Still, we didn't have many options at that point. I make a joke about him calling his buddy at the gas station saying, "I'm sending 2 women your way." Jane laughs nervously. We make it to the chevron and this kid, 18 or 19 years old, comes out to pump our gas. He's wearing a chevron vest that's way too big for him. He asks us how we're doing, then says, "There's a lot of weirdos out here tonight." I ask him what he means, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracks a little. He just shrugs and keeps pumping. At one point during our conversation, Jane calls Sam the mechanic man and leaves him a voicemail. She tells him we made it to the gas station and how much we appreciate his help. I thought the call was unnecessary, but it is what it is. A few minutes later, we're on the highway and about 10 minutes from our hotel. Jane's phone rings and it's Sam. Again, she thanks him profusely. He tells her his name is Sam Glesty, and he wrote a book called Wrongly Accused. We should read it on our plane ride home. This piqued my interest. Jane, you have to look up that book to see what it's about. She Googles it while he's still talking. Then she goes limp, and she looks like she's going to puke. What is it? I'm trying to watch the road and look at her phone. He was accused of being the Green River Killer. My blood runs cold. Back at the hotel, we lock every lock on the door and do some more digging, and we pull up a photo from an old news article. It's definitely him. Same face, just older. Neither of us sleeps much that night. The book he wrote was about all of that. We ended up stuck in Portland for 2 more days due to a snowstorm in Chicago. It was a weird, tension-filled 2 days. We barely left the hotel room except for food. Considering the circumstances and weirdness of that night, things could have gone horribly wrong. We were 2 women alone on a dark road with a man who had a violent past. I'm glad all I got out of that night was a story. Jane never talked about the West Coast being better after that.
About 30 years ago now, I'd have been a 9 or 10-year-old boy when I was attending primary school in the UK. We had the odd, rare announcement during assembly where the headmaster would warn us of someone acting strangely near the school gates. I remember him being quite serious about it, telling us not to walk home alone and to stay in groups. A few of us claimed we'd seen a bloke in a gray car parked up by the corner shop, just sitting there watching. And there might have been 2 or 3 warnings during my whole childhood there, so it wasn't like we lived in a dodgy area or anything. The headmaster would just loosely describe someone's appearance, jumping out of bushes or whatever, and tell us, if you see anyone matching that description, avoid them and tell an adult. During one particular announcement, he described a middle-aged man, about 5 feet 8 inches, with short ginger hair and this long green army-style coat. He'd been reported to the school for behaving weirdly, randomly shouting at people in the street, lingering by the school gates at home time, that sort of thing. Now I think, about a week later, I was cycling back from my mate's house at around 7 or 8 p.m. It was late in the year, so it was properly dark, probably November time. Nowadays, you'd likely go and pick a child up from someone's house at that time, but back in those days it was pretty normal, at least for a boy, to just cycle home by themselves. My mate's house was only a 5-minute cycle away, and didn't involve going on any main roads, just through this little pathway between 2 housing estates. I had one of those bikes with the dodgy lights that barely worked, but I knew the route like the back of my hand. I wasn't scared or anything, just pedaling along thinking about whatever we'd been playing that evening. Then about halfway between mine and his house, there's this little play park with swings and a climbing frame. As I'm cycling past it, I notice not too far ahead, there's a man walking towards me who, from what I could make out under the streetlight, matched the description of this reported weirdo. The green coat especially stood out. My stomach dropped a bit. As we crossed paths, he suddenly raised his hand to one side of his mouth, like cupping it to angle his voice towards me, and says quite clearly, "Get off and walk it." He didn't make any motion towards me or try to grab me or anything, but I was well within arm's reach of him, close enough to smell cigarette smoke on his coat. I absolutely legged it back home, pedaling like mad. Got in and promptly forgot about it. Didn't even tell my parents, which seems mental now. It's only in the years that have passed that I find myself wondering, what if I had actually been walking home instead of cycling? Would he have tried something? It's perhaps naive to think it, but I was well into my karate at the time, training 3 times a week. I was a bit of a hothead, quite cocky really, and genuinely confident I could handle myself in a scrap. So I reckon I'd have put up a decent fight at least. But then again, I was still just a skinny 10-year-old kid. Makes you think, doesn't it? Even still, I get properly angry thinking about it now. But I'm pretty sure I was cycling back home by myself in the dark again within a few days, because that's just what you did back then. But another part thinks maybe nothing would have been done anyway. Just one of those things, I suppose. I'm pretty sure I've seen crawlers, or something like them, twice. Now, the first time was in late fall 2021, around 9 at night. I was walking home through an alley. The alley went straight ahead for a few hundred feet, when suddenly I saw a creature crawl across a small side street at the end of the alley. There was a street light there, so I could see it clearly for a few seconds as it passed by. It was a big creature that looked sort of like a person, but it was walking on its hands and feet. It was huge, about 1.5 to 2 times the size of a full-grown man. It had pale skin and no hair at all. Its arms and legs were long and thin, and they were all about the same length. The second I saw it, I felt extremely scared and ran straight home, which was lucky because my house was only about 30 seconds away. I was terrified for the rest of the night. Then, the second time this happened was in early fall 2023. It was around 10 or 11 at night. I was walking home through the same alley, but this time I was with a friend. This time, we both saw 2 crawlers go past the exact same spot where I saw the first one in 2021. They looked the same, were the same size, and crawled on all 4s in the same creepy way. I was glad that someone else saw it too. It meant I wasn't going crazy, but it also made it feel much more real and scary. Then, about 2 months ago, my mom said she saw the same thing near the same place while walking the dog at night. I should also mention that other strange things have happened around here. My friend heard someone call her name from the dark part of that alley. Something hit my second-floor window really hard. And there have been lots of other weird things happening in this town and in the woods nearby. I really want to find out more about all this, but honestly, I'm too scared. I feel bad for everyone here who has seen something similar.
This happened to me just a few weeks ago, and it hasn't left my memory since. I'm 20 years old and just moved into a small apartment complex a few miles from my parents' house. I've never lived alone before, so this whole situation is pretty new to me. The complex was 3 stories tall and had 6 total apartments. The only one that was available was on the top floor, so that's the one I had to go with. Anyways, I finally got everything in and was able to relax for a little bit before bed. I think the time was around 10 p.m., but I still had to set up my bed and eat dinner. The only thing I really had to eat was ramen, so I started the stove and put a pot of water on top to boil. As I was waiting, I heard the floor in front of my apartment creak softly. I wasn't too sure at first if the complex just made noises or if someone was actually at my door. Either way, I figured I should just check in case someone was there. I opened the door slowly. "Hello?" I said softly, as there was an older man standing a few feet from my door, with his back facing me. I assumed he lived in the neighboring apartment, as the door was directly in front of mine, which was where he was facing. A few seconds went by, and he turned softly and said, "Sorry," then began to walk down the stairs. I closed the door and checked on the pot of water. I started to feel a little bit uneasy, mostly because he didn't go into the neighboring room. There would be no reason for anyone to come up to the top floor unless you lived there. Anyways, I finished making the ramen and tried not to think about it too much. I was just excited to finally have my own place and live alone for once. This was a big accomplishment for me, and I didn't want to be creeped out for my first night. So I finished making my bed and turned all the lights off. I stayed up on my phone for a little bit before eventually dozing off. I want to say I fell asleep around 11 or 12, but I'm not too sure. However, I do remember reading the clock at 1:29 when I woke up after hearing something from the room below mine. It sounded like a soft shuffling of footsteps. I laid there waiting to hear anything else. It took maybe 5 minutes before I heard the creaking floor from outside my room again. I was beginning to panic a little bit, running through my mind over and over to try and remember if I had locked the door after opening it earlier that night. As I waited in silence, I heard the subtle clicking sound of the doorknob trying to turn. It was locked. I waited for anything further to happen, but after a few seconds I heard the neighbor's door open and then shut. Relieved, I got out of bed and quickly double-checked to make sure my front door was locked. Then I went back to bed. I figured it must have been the old man who had possibly just gotten confused as to which door was his. When morning came, a loud knock came at my front door. I was greeted by 2 police officers. They asked me if I had experienced anything unusual last night or if anything was missing. Apparently, a man had robbed 2 apartments last night, both having forgotten to lock their doors. I told the officers everything, and they thanked me and walked back downstairs. I'm not sure if they found the man or not, but nothing happened since. Just thinking about the whole situation makes me really uneasy, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had forgotten to lock the door that night. When I was a kid, around 10 or 11 years old, my house was on the end of a low-traffic neighborhood road that ran up against a large forest. I would often run around, play games, and go for walks with my friends out there behind my house. Of all the forests and woodsy areas I've seen, this one seemed to be the most dense. I mean, the trees were so close together at some parts of the forest it was hard to walk next to a friend without having to constantly move behind or in front of them to pass between 2 trees. Anyways, it was a regular Friday night, and I invited my best friend over to hang out, since there was no school tomorrow. By the time he came over, the sun was beginning to set. Still, we wanted to hang out in the woods for a while before it got too dark. We grabbed some heavy flashlights just in case and headed for the trees. We walked for maybe 10 or 15 minutes before finding a fallen tree which we sat on and just talked. This was one of our favorite things to do, just sit in the woods and talk about whatever we felt like. I'm not quite sure how long we were actually sitting there, but we definitely got lost in the conversation for a while, because when I finally looked up, the forest was almost completely covered in darkness. Initially, neither of us were too nervous, as we knew our way around the forest, and we figured we would just start heading back before it got pitch black. We turned our flashlights on and started walking. I will admit, though, I was definitely a little creeped out. It was almost completely silent other than the crunch of the leaves from our footsteps, and we could only see a few feet ahead of us because of the dense trees blocking the view. After 2 or 3 minutes of walking, we both suddenly stopped, as we both heard the very distinct sound of a person walking slowly across the leaves just ahead of us. They must have been behind some trees, just 15 to 20 feet in front of where we were standing. I couldn't stop myself from wondering, why would anyone be going for a walk alone in the middle of the woods at this time of the night? I tried to stay calm, but just as we thought the person was beginning to get further away, the footsteps stopped. My friend and I both froze. We looked at each other in fear and confusion. It felt as though suddenly everything had become completely silent. As I stood there looking at my friend, I had a rush go through my body of a feeling that I was in immediate danger. Almost a split second later, I heard leaves crunch from just a few feet behind us. My instincts kicked in, and I took off running straight in the direction of my house. As I ran, my shoulders were constantly bumping into the trees, as it was hard to navigate through them with barely any light. I heard footsteps crunching the leaves behind me. I hoped it was my friend, but I was too scared to look back. After maybe 30 seconds of running, I heard the footsteps take a sharp turn to the right and drift off in the distance. This made me even more terrified that those footsteps were not my friend's, and made me wonder where my friend was and if he was in trouble. Eventually, I made it to my backyard and immediately went in my house through the back door. I was out of breath. I peeked through the windows, looking to see if my friend would show up, but after a few minutes passed, I began to really worry. My parents came downstairs and asked if I was okay, as they saw the panicked look on my face. As I was telling them everything, the doorbell rang from the front of our house. My dad nervously cracked open the door. My friend immediately pushed the door open and ran inside. He said after I ran, he froze in place, not knowing what to do. He heard 2 sets of footprints go off in my direction after me, and after a few minutes he decided to run towards my house as well. My parents called the police to report the incident, but nothing ever came of it. My friend and I still talk about it to this day, coming up with new theories about what really happened that night. Part of me wishes that I had looked back to see who was chasing me, but I know in a forest like that, there was no way I would have gotten 5 steps before running straight into a tree. Anyways, that is still the most terrifying experience I've ever had, and ever since then, I always get uneasy when I'm around the forest at night. It was a Saturday night. My friends and I were getting ready to go see the opening act at a local bar's music night. We lost track of time and realized we needed to leave right away so we wouldn't miss it. I hurried and gathered my wallet and keys, and we rushed out of the house and got into my car. Luckily, we got to the bar just in time to see the show. After a few drinks, I patted my pockets down, and to my surprise, I couldn't feel my phone. I checked every pocket and asked all my friends if they had seen it, but it didn't turn up. They helped me search the bar around all the tables and areas that we'd been. Eventually, we gave up and tried calling it on one of my friend's phones. After 2 rings, someone answered the phone. "Hello?" I said. They didn't speak, but we could hear them breathing on the other line. After a few seconds, I started to speak again, but they immediately hung up. I was frustrated that someone had stolen my phone, but I figured I'd take care of it tomorrow, as it was getting late and there was nothing I could really do about it right now. About an hour later, we left the bar, and I dropped my friends off at their homes and started heading back to my house. During the drive, I was running through my memory of the last time I had my phone on me. As I was pulling into the driveway, I came to the conclusion that the last time I remember having my phone was on the bed while I was getting ready to leave. The more I thought about it, the more I started to get freaked out as I was getting out of my car. I went to the front door and unlocked it and walked inside cautiously. I slowly made my way over to the bedroom and turned on the lights. Sure enough, my phone was sitting right there on the bed where I thought I had left it. I searched the whole house to find any trace of someone having been there, but I couldn't find anything at all. That night I had trouble sleeping, as every little noise made me uneasy. I told my friends about it the next day, and they all agreed it was creepy. We also ended up agreeing that calling the cops probably wouldn't lead to anything, so we ended up leaving it at that. Nothing else ever happened in the following years, but it still keeps me up sometimes thinking about what really happened with my phone that night.